Okay. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Strengthening the Culture of Responsibility with Respect to Dual-Use Research and Biosecurity. I'm Amy Patterson, Acting Director of Science Policy at the U.S. National Institutes of Health. On behalf of the United States government and the scientific community, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this important discussion. This event is co-sponsored by the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the National Institutes of Health, and hosted by the U.S. National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity, or NSABB, which, as I think Dr. Franz has explained, is a group of non-government experts that advises the U.S. government on dual-use research and other biosecurity issues. I'd also like to offer special thanks to the Inter-Academy panel, the International Union of Microbiology Society, the International Union of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, and the National Academy of Science, who are cooperating with us for today's event. Although all of us hail from different parts of the world and from different scientific disciplines, we share many common goals and responsibilities, including those of advancing public health, protecting safety and security of our respective nations. And no matter what our discipline, each of us would acknowledge that scientific research is a vital social undertaking. It underpins many important events, including public health and safety, environmental health, agriculture, and the economy. Increasingly, science is a global endeavor, and we need to foster scientific progress while minimizing the potential for the misuse of research methodologies and information. And so today's discussion is an important one. It's about how we can more fully develop a culture of responsibility and accountability within the scientific community. It's our hope that we come away from today with some broadly applicable principles and ideas that we can share widely. And at this time, I'd like to briefly introduce our distinguished panel. We're very fortunate to be here in Bethesda, Maryland, with Dr. Paul Keim, to my right, the acting chair of the NSABB, and NSABB members, Judge Susan Ehrlich, and Dr. Stuart Levy. The discussion today will be co-moderated in Beijing by NSABB member Dr. David Franz and Dr. Li Huang, Director General of the Institute of Microbiology, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Additionally, we'd like to take a moment to recognize two other NSABB members present in Beijing, Dr. Randall Murch and Chris Park. And with that, I'd like to turn the proceedings over at this juncture to Dr. Paul Keim. Paul.
Thanks, Amy. While we all recognize the important contributions of scientific research to improved health, quality of life, the environment, agriculture, and the economy, we must also recognize that good science can be put to bad uses. Before we begin our discussion on the culture of responsibility, I'd like to briefly describe what we mean by the terms dual-use research and dual-use research of concern. Over the past 10 years, there's been increasing recognition of the need to consider that new information, products, and technologies from scientific research could be misused to pose a biological threat to public health or national security. The term dual-use research acknowledges that information from research can be put to beneficial and harmful uses. Many have correctly noted that dual use is inherent in virtually all scientific research. Consequently, we use the term dual research of concern to describe that subset of dual-use research that has the highest potential for generating information that could be misused for harmful purposes. The NSABB committee has focused on dual-use research within the life sciences, but we recognize that dual research is not an issue confined to the life sciences, and in fact, a number of other disciplines are already dealing with this issue. Today's discussion is a wonderful opportunity to hear perspectives from individuals from many different disciplines and from many different parts of the world. The NSABB has given some consideration to what is meant when we say a culture of responsibility. Our committee is in the midst of developing guidance for research institutions on how to enhance this culture of responsibility, and I'd like to share with you some of our thoughts as we develop a working definition of a culture of responsibility. The NSABB has identified 4 overarching concepts that pertain to a culture of responsibility. The first concept is that as scientists, our universal goal involves the generation and advancement of knowledge. But as scientists, we need to remember and acknowledge that this knowledge can be used for both beneficial and harmful purposes. Secondly, the scientific community needs to maintain an awareness for the implications of our research, especially any potential for deliberate misuse of the information, products, and technologies generated from our research. Thirdly, scientists should consciously live by and demonstrate these beliefs, attitudes, and values in our day-to-day practices. Always be aware of the potential for harmful applications of our own research. Finally, in maintaining a culture of responsibility, we as a scientific community need to hold ourselves and our peers accountable while still advancing science and maintaining public trust. So what do we hope to accomplish today? Scientific research is a global endeavor, and the culture of responsibility must extend to the global scientific community. You represent a global perspective, and we're intensely interested in your thoughts and comments. Simply put, how do you think that a culture of responsibility is best accomplished? We've developed 5 discussion questions regarding this issue, and we'd be very much appreciative of your thoughts and insights on this topic. So with that, I'd like to turn the microphone and the attention over to our co-moderators in Beijing, Dave and Lee.
Is there anyone that would like to address that? And please introduce yourself. And
Piers Millett from the Biological Weapons Convention Implementation Support Unit. I think to get you going, Dave, I think we start at the beginning. It's a willingness to even talk about this topic. My own experience is that there's a great variation in the willingness to engage on security issues, on biosecurity, on dual use education, changes from facility to facility, person to person, background to background. Some disciplines are better than others, but in general, there's still a long way to go for the most part. If you bring up these issues with a scientist, that they're still sitting in their seat when you finish talking and haven't made it out the door and heading off in a different direction. So I think that's a starting point.
thank you. You've got to start someplace, and Pierce did that for us here tonight. Anyone else have comments? Nancy?
So Nancy Connell, and I actually run a Biosafety Level 3 lab with a Select Agent program. And I think the most important thing is for the PI to generate a sense of trust. And I've actually been known to use the word den mother, which is sort of an American term for someone who keeps track of how everybody's doing and how everybody's feeling, because it's a very emotional thing to work with anthrax and plague, and it's nervous making, and it's someone gets sick and everyone panics, and we take our temperature, and it's a very emotional and high stress situation. And so the communication, I think, starts from the PI and goes down through all the levels, down to the techs, and we meet regularly. So I think that communication in these labs is one of the ways to start. So once you set up that kind of communication, you can begin to bring in the concept of dual use and actually start talking about what some of the experiments might mean and what the implications of some of the experiments are. So that's one level. And then there are levels that go all the way up. So the institutional biosafety committees, which analyze the experiments that are being performed in each institution, is another excellent place to start educating at least the members of that committee. But the problem remains, as Pierce already said, that most PIs don't have time to think about this, and that is really the problem. So at the level of the laboratory, the institutional biosafety committee, one other context in the States anyway is to use the required ethics training that accompanies all of the NIH training programs for graduate students. And so in our institution, we've had dual-use training for almost 15 years, actually 19 years, in fact, since I got there. So, but I think we're unusual in that regard. So I think starting with young people is the way to go. And by young people, I don't only mean incoming graduate students. I mean college students and high school students. I mean, high school students will talk about this stuff. I've done it. I've gone into high schools and talked about dual use and explained the IL-4, extramelia virus to ninth graders, and they really understand these kinds of concepts. So
yeah, thanks for that, Nancy. I think you started out on a very important point, Nancy, and that is trust and communication. And then you went into what I think as more regulatory kinds of activities. And I think all of those things are needed to one degree or another. And Pierce also stated that one size does not fit all. And I think those are all important principles. Anyone else have a comment on that one before we move on to the next one? Or yes.
My name is Chris Dos Remedios. I'm from the University of Sydney in Australia. I get the impression that we've taken a rather negative approach to this question. So I just want to inject a little note of maybe optimism, because I was detecting that, you know, we don't. I felt that we hadn't been doing so well, and I've got to say that going back a few years, there was a conference in Como, and there were a couple of Australians there too, and we went back to Australia and started to try to implement educational programs, and I've got to say that. Today, even though I was only a small part of that there is quite an increase in awareness and education, particularly at the undergraduate level. Now, the other side of education is to educate the scientists themselves, the senior scientists, and one of our membership of Panel B said this evening that you really can't teach an old scientist anything, or words to that effect. And in a sense, he's right. But I actually think that the students teach the scientists, their leaders, their advisors quite a lot, and it is a two-way street. So I'm not pessimistic about it. I actually see room for improvement for sure, but I actually see real progress has been made in Australia. And one of the things that I think would be useful for us would be to have a look at the guidelines put out by NIH for their training programs, because we don't do that really in a formal sense, but it would be quite useful, and quite possibly that's true for other countries around here too. So I'm actually more pessimistic than you. I'm more optimistic. I think you've been too pessimistic, and I'm actually the opposite. I think we've made some progress. Sure, there's a lot to go, but I think we're stepping in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you. That's useful. We've talked about, the first question was about attributes, and then we subsequently go into how to do these things. We've already talked about some of the how, I think. I like Nancy's communication and trust. Certainly, I think are very important attributes. Yes, Terry.
Hello, Terry Taylor. I see some familiar faces there. I was wondering if you could comment on the connecting this cultural responsibility, and can embrace a whole range of issues, but they're all interconnected. Let us say ethics, proper integrity in scientific results, if you like, the security aspects, the safe conduct of science. So there's a whole connection, and my experience in going around different parts of the world, and maybe colleagues here who've been with me in those places, find this strong connection between those four areas. And this makes the whole issue more powerful, particularly at the individual level, in reaching out to the individual scientists. We heard earlier today Dr. Jerry Epstein talk about a conference, the World Conference on Integrity in Science in Singapore, which took place earlier this year, last June, in which issued a statement. Do you think that those kinds of things, making this broad connection between security, safety, ethics, and good science, if you like, integrity in scientific results, that's the way to do it, rather than isolate single issues like dual use, for example?
So you're asking for a comment?
Yeah, I'm asking for a comment, yeah.
Bethesda, or from the audience?
Or from the audience, yes.
I could make a brief comment. We agree with that, Terry. We think that, in fact, the way to deliver dual-use knowledge and training is to integrate it into ethics courses and responsible conduct of research. And that if you integrate those, they're going to have much more traction than if it has to stand alone.
So should we move on to the second question? I believe the question says, what are some of the ways that principal investigators or lab leaders can use to strengthen a culture of responsibility regarding biosecurity?
I think it's very clear from the earlier discussions on the first point that really the culture responsibility should start with the principal investigator, and that individual shows all those working under him or her exactly what this means, that we're working and we're in a time when it's critically important to understand both biosafety and biosecurity, but the principal investigator should be the representative. That should be the model, and this individual can certainly help get this message of the culture to all those working in his or her laboratories.
I wonder whether there's something in between points 1 and 2, and just from a practical level, how is the message going to get to the principal investigators, and what's in it for them to pick this up as an issue? I think if there's one thing I've learned, if you want anything to work, it's where's the money, where's the resources coming from. So I think that's part of the framework to this is, whilst the message is important, the resources to get that message out, to make this an issue that stands out from the other 100 issues that are on everybody's desks, would be a good incentive, I think.
Would you comment a little more on what you mean by resources needed? If it's a culture that we're developing?
Yeah, so if it's a culture, there's a message. And the message has got to be sold. It doesn't matter whether whether you do it by taking a roadshow around major research institutions. It doesn't matter whether it's addressing conferences. Now, if you want to speak at those conferences, there are costs involved. There's opportunities to co-sponsor meetings, hold panels at meetings, and that requires resources. So at the end of the day, this is going to work. Somebody's going to have to invest cold hard cash to get this message from a piece of paper, a document. Even if you've got national, international consensus on what goes in that, you then have to sell it to a large number of people, presumably starting off in the US and after that around the world. And that's no small task. And that's a major stumbling block that I think is there, that will exist and will continue to exist, is how do we get the resources to take the very good message out to build that culture? And I think whilst I agree that we start off with personal responsibilities, if you're talking about cultures, you're talking about interactions between people, if you're talking about interactions with people, you've got to get out there and speak to people.
I'm Anwar Nasim from Pakistan, work for COMSTEC, which is a committee for the OIC countries. Let me first make the obvious point, which is that in terms of cultural responsibility or dual-use research, all these issues will have to be dealt in country-specific fashion. We have to raise the awareness that is needed there. And sometimes you have to use cultural traditions and norms to bring it into this. I think I share the optimism which was really expressed by one of the colleagues. A lot has happened in the last year or two by virtue of our involvement with this Congress in Warsaw last year. We were able to start a program of dual-use research in one of our leading universities. And then the students are becoming involved and we'll be participating in future meetings. But I think on the specific second question, it seems to me that one has to start with, firstly, the awareness. The principal investigators, people who are working as PIs or laboratory leaders, and that awareness will have to be tackled at the national level, that everybody starts to participate in that event with an awareness related to biosafety and biosecurity. We're trying to do that. But as far as what should they be doing, I think in a way it's obvious. They say the quality of leadership is to get the best out of people. But you could only get best out of the people by setting a personal example. If you have a PI or a laboratory head who fully understands the implications, the dimensions of biosafety and biosecurity, and if necessary, when the question of debating dual use comes, he or she understands fully what the implications are. Then by setting an example, either in lab practices or even in his or our own thinking, this will all follow. And lastly, my only comment is that this is a global problem. It is being tackled at that level, and especially now with NIH in Bethesda and with people here and in Chinese Academy of Sciences, the degree of interaction has increased fairly significantly, and therefore these issues are being talked about, and that's a very healthy sign. Thank you.
Thank you. So setting up an example is a good way of strengthening the sense of responsibility. So any more comments?
I would ask the audience there a question about resources and motivation. I mean, it's easy to see that we can regulate this. We can require PIs and laboratories to do things. But that seems the wrong way to develop a culture of responsibility. What are the softer, gentler ways to, in fact, encourage people to buy into this, to get that awareness in the PI? Are there incentives that we can use that would be positive as opposed to the negative?
Hi, I'm Jerry Epstein. Hello, everyone. I think it's one way to get the message across that I hope works, and I'm not in the position of being a PI, so I'm not sure whether it does work or not. But the argument I try to make is I will tell an investigator, if you think your science is irrelevant or worthless, then you probably don't have a dual-use issue. It's probably not very important. But if you really think your science is powerful, and if you really have a passion for discovering things that might really matter, then this is an idea that has to be part of your thinking, just like the other things, biosafety and bioethics. So I think biosecurity really goes hand in hand with the power and effectiveness of the science. And I don't see that as a heavy-handed approach. I remain to be corrected. But it seems to me that if people are willing and proud and eager to explore the potential of this technology, that is an acknowledgement that there is a biosecurity issue, and one can play to that.
Thanks, Jerry. Any other comments on this question from Bethesda?
Well, I would only say perhaps one should come to some consensus that perhaps all PIs and lab leaders should buy into a cultural responsibility. How can we do that? Because they are the models, they are the repositories of these ideas, these ethical concepts. So should we in some way say that in order to be a PI, you have to buy into a culture of responsibility? I'm asking that as a question, but also because I think it's critically important if laboratories are following the example of the leader of that laboratory. What do you think?
In the right place. Meg Flanagan from Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and I bring a sort of more cynical view to this. The way that I see it, and I'll qualify by saying that I'm about 3 years out of a laboratory setting, but the way that I see it is that asking established PIs to embrace a culture of responsibility that they don't currently see a need for is sort of like asking for a shift in values. I think that's very difficult to achieve, especially gently, as Dr. Keim suggested we should do. One of the things that came up in one of our earlier discussions was the concept of educating at the graduate level, pretty much at the entry point for a scientist's professional career. And I likened it to the situation of the reduction in smoking that we've seen in the U.S. It's difficult to establish causality, but I think arguments have been made that, and I tend to believe that we're able to achieve this by targeting ad campaigns to kids. And so smoking became uncool in kids, and I've seen this anecdotally in younger people myself compared to when I was growing up. So what I had suggested in the group, I think some people agreed with me, was that And again, the cynical part is that the PIs may be sort of a lost cause in this scheme. But if you can train graduate students at the onset of their professional careers, and it's sort of not something that's questioned, it's just part of a curriculum, then I think that they can embrace the idea that this is a normal part of becoming a scientist.
We've got another one coming here. Thanks for that, Meg. Education and making it part of our earlier education.
Hi, I'm Andy Pitt from the University of Glasgow. I just make a comment on the awareness of principal investigators. I think, as you know, students have an attention span of about 5 minutes, and PIs probably even less. So, in terms of, I don't think anybody is against this in principle. I don't think anybody would say that they didn't buy into this. But most people can't keep it in their heads for more than 5 minutes. They have more pressing issues. So I think one of the ways to build awareness is to continue to build awareness, to make sure that people are regularly brought up to date with changes in legislation, changes in thinking, changes in the science that's going on, and that you frequently remind them of their responsibilities, because we're only as responsible as what we heard 5 minutes ago. So if you're going to build this sort of awareness, it has to be an ongoing process for current PIs. Hopefully, as the new generations come through, as we've just heard, they will have this inbuilt into their understanding, and maybe it will be more forward in their minds. But most of us are more worried about where tomorrow's buck is coming from, not about the dual use issues. So I think that making people aware on a regular basis, I don't know how you do that, mail shots or just general awareness, but that seems to be something that we should be doing.
Andrew, just a quick follow-up before you leave. Are you saying it's something you really don't have to be thinking about all the time, but you need to be aware, kind of like being immunized? You know about it, and when you see it, you'll recognize it when you see it. And is that kind of what you're saying?
Sure, and I think there are points in the process where you need to be reminded of it. So when you walk in the lab 9 o'clock in the morning on a normal working day, it doesn't really matter. But when you're publishing, when you're writing grant applications, when you're going out and talking to people, that's when you need to be aware of it, because that's when it's perhaps more of an issue. So there are points in the process where you can make people more aware of this. And I think as an ongoing process, just generally, it's awareness needs to be raised frequently in order for it to work.
I think that's a nice point. We got another one on this one. It's that round mic.
This one. Okay.
Just stand right there.
Okay. Actually, in some institutions like the Philippines, we're just beginning to have our institutional biosafety committees. And so when we talk about the culture of responsibility in relation to these issues of dual-use research of concern and biosecurity issues, we recently had our biosafety committee inside the institution, and that studies, before they can get funded by international donors, for example, have to pass through this particular committee. And therefore, we needed to fast-track everything in terms of how to evaluate a research and say that this particular research poses a risk to the community or not, and so on. And so what I'm trying to say is that while it might have existed in other countries earlier, it's just beginning in some other countries, and therefore we realized also that beginning with our graduate students is actually something very important in the promotion of this culture of biosafety and biosecurity.
Yes, one more. That point made with regard to sort of linking biosafety and biosecurity, I think, is another way to describe the fact that this is just part of a larger culture that involves behavior in many ways in our laboratories. Katsu?
Yes, Katsu Furuka from Japan Science and Technology Agency. When we look at those research programs which have been known for their innovative advanced experiments, those program principal investigators as well as researchers, they are already acquired the culture of responsibility through their daily conduct. From our experience, innovation capability and also the culture of responsibility seems to be the two sides of the same coin. And when we look at the past examples of biocrimes or bioterrorism, the perpetrators tend to come from those institutions where principal investigators didn't have the appropriate management style set in place, or the communication within the research program was not good. So I think whenever we think about this issue of culture of responsibility, it is always important to keep in mind that the communication and transparency, communication and also the transparency, as well as the trust among the research members, these pillars constitute this culture of responsibility. And also, in order to foster culture of responsibility or practice of biosafety in laboratory in the developing countries, I think donor countries can make incentives such as making this biosafety guideline adherence as a requirement for the aid program. I think so. Developed countries can collaborate with each other to establish this kind of standard of biosafety issues as a precondition for the assistance for research program. Thank you.
That's it. Yes. We got two. It's all right. We're kind of running these questions together. So
okay, I'll try to be very short. I'm Chaimovic from Brazil, and first let me make very clear that making the distinction of developed versus developing countries in these issues is extremely dangerous. So I don't want to make the distinction at the outstart. The point I want to make is that biosafety rules are rather easy to adapt because they can be enforced by the institution. Rules that don't have an enforcement mechanism and a penalty for not following the rules are extremely easy to make and impose. Now, culture is something totally different. You don't impose culture. So my problem with some of the things that have been said is recognizing that the growth of a culture is person dependent. That is, it depends on the attitude of the PI. The spread of a culture is always institution dependent. If we take education as perhaps the best tool to adapt, to grow with a culture of responsibility, it is the institution that has the responsibility of educating, formulating, and maintaining that culture. And my feeling, having been the director of a large science institution in Brazil, is that if the institution maintains the attitude towards culture change, some senior investigators will continue their life as always, giving not too much attention to this change. However, the students will make the pressure for them to change. So it is sometimes you can trust that if you maintain the institutional pressure for a responsibility culture, the students, the younger generations, will make sure that this culture is attained by all the PIs in the institution. Thank you.
Very nice. Good comments. Catherine?
Yes, hello. Catherine Nixdorf from the University of Darmstadt University of Technology in Germany. I want to say something in support, perhaps, of instituting formal courses for instructing students about biosecurity, biosafety and biosecurity, and also about dual use aspects in particular. It's been my experience that the majority of students that I've come into contact in the beginning don't know really much about these issues, but if they're subjected to instruction in this area, that then they become really very, very interested and enthusiastic about learning more about it. So I think it's just a question of that the majority really haven't thought of these things in the beginning. And if they are subjected to instruction in this area, that they take it very positively. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. These have all been excellent comments. Is there a follow-up from Bethesda on any of this? Codes of conduct are a useful tool for strengthening the culture of responsibility and raising awareness about dual-use research and biosecurity issues. What is the best way to encourage acceptance of and adherence to a code of conduct in a research organization? So any...
maybe my comment is more related to number 4.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm Naresh Shinomiya from National Defense Medical College of Japan. We did survey about biosecurity and biosafety issues in university courses, undergraduate and postgraduate courses. And most courses do not have biosafety or biosecurity education, but they have bioethics educations. So I think incorporation of biosafety issues into the bioethics is one clue to enhance dual-use education for scientists or students. Thank you.
Good. That's another good point. And it seems that a lot of these things are running together. Taking this issue by itself is probably not as effective as developing it into sort of a matrix or a web, which in the end leads to cultural changes. Any specific comments with regard to codes of conduct in that last question? Again, is it like an immunization, or is it just another one of many tools of awareness? Thoughts on codes of conduct?
I'll start you off again. I think the discussions we've had in Geneva on this matter is a sort of minor difference, but it's not the codes of conduct that are a tool for building the culture of responsibility, but the process of developing the codes that really has the impact.
Yeah. Great point. As in so much of what we do, the process is often more important than the product, and that's a good point.
Indeed, in Japan, the Science Council of Japan revised the code of conduct to include various issues as well. But even today, most scientists don't even know about it. Quite frankly, code of conduct has to be translated into an operational form, such as a form of code of practice or other voluntary oversight mechanism. By doing so, and also teaching the code of the meaning and also background of code of conduct in the other classes, such as bioethics class or biosafety class, I think incorporating code of conduct into these other relevant mechanisms is essential in order to make code of conduct as a meaningful tool for biosafety and biosecurity. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Certainly, if you're involved, yes, you can come on up. If you're involved in developing a code of conduct, that has to be a very effective way to instill that in your own thinking. What about the next generation, the third generation, and so on after that code has been developed? Or is it a continual process?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Bob Matthews from Australia. In terms of codes of conduct, back in 2005 in Geneva, we developed codes of conduct issues quite well, and back in those days, the discussion was developing a new code. However, since then, we've realised that most workplaces have a code already. Like wherever you work, there's operational requirements, things you should and should not do, and since then, we've actually developed elements which could be added to an existing code which relate to both biosecurity, awareness of the BWC, awareness of oversight processes, and I think these days, rather than talking about a new code, we should be talking about adding to existing codes relevant elements to these issues of dual use. And I think certainly the code should be, in effect, obligatory for the workplace. And it should be a living document, not just referred to once a year, but sort of becoming part of the whole process of how you work in that workplace. Thank you.
Bob, what kinds of institutions are you talking about, and how do you actually add pieces to the code? You relook at it, relook the code, and reconsider it from the beginning, and modify it slightly, or?
Well, in fact, yes. Like, for example, at our workplace in Defence in Melbourne, we've got an existing code which covers all government public servants in Australia. So we reviewed that, and we've added elements to that relevant to dual use and the responsible behaviour of scientists on dual use issues. Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Yuan Zhiming. I came from Chinese Academy of Sciences. I do agree that the culture of responsibility can be strengthened by educating the undergraduate, postgraduate, senior scientist, or in institutional level. But anyway, as the previous speaker said, the culture is, we can impose the culture to everybody. Everyone have their culture, attitude, or something else. So most important things is to issue the regulation. And the code of conduct is also another kind of standard that should be issued and accepted by the scientist and well discussed by scientists. If the scientist cannot accept the code of conduct, the code of conduct cannot be implemented to guarantee the biosecurity in lab. Thank you.
So it's Andy Pitt from the University of Glasgow. Just one very quick comment. I think if you want scientists to take this seriously, the other thing that we need to try and get across is they have nothing to fear from the process. I think scientists, the moment they think there's regulation being imposed on them in any way, think they have something to fear. And so if the message can be got across as part of this process that there is nothing to fear from it, but actually it's working in their favour because it raises the awareness of what they're doing, that would be a good thing.
Thank you. I'm not sure where I'm speaking into here. Just on codes, it might be also useful to keep in mind the value of an oath as well, such as the Hippocratic Oath type approaches as practiced in medicine. It's actually making a promise to loved ones on a very special graduation day, so there may be some value in that. Could I make a couple of comments in relation to education as well?
Just less than a minute.
Less than a minute, okay. Forcing laboratories to take special measures, I think you end up generating a tick. Sorry. There's a danger you generate a tick box approach, which may nonetheless be the least worst element. And I also think it's important when you're looking at education to consider this a process, and one which involves scientists, but also looking at champions, funders of research, and textbook authors. It's also quite useful.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time. I think we need to have a quick closure of the session. I'd like to get back to Bethesda for final comments.
No, I think from the session, what we've heard, one theme comes through, that you can't enforce, you can't legislate. This has got to be something that comes from within, a comment I made earlier. But I would like to stress that I think any measure, codes of conduct, ethics, I think it involves education, but it has to come and be accepted by the principal investigator and all the scientists. So I would say, in summary for me, we should start young. We should start even in the high schools to teach what this responsibility and culture is. And we certainly should have it adhered to by the principal investigators, but that it cannot be forced. It has to come from within.
Susan, Paul?
I would just add that, we've heard from the international community some of the same issues that we've been dealing with on our committee, this balance between enforced regulation and something that has grown within. I think one of the most interesting comments I heard is that if you train the youngsters, the students, that will put pressure on the PI and the institutions to develop a culture as well. And that's I like that idea of starting at the bottom. And of course, over time that's going to work, but even more immediately, it's going to put immediate pressure on the PIs.
Susan? All right, well, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's discussion. I'd like to also emphasize an additional point that I think is inherent in many of the comments made today, but perhaps hasn't been made explicitly. I think what's on the table for all of the scientific community is a very precious resource that's at stake, and that's public trust and confidence in the scientific enterprise. And nurturing, cultivating, expanding a culture of responsibility in our respective nations, in our respective cultures, I think is a very important step that we need to take for the future of science. And again, thank you all for participating. If you have any additional comments, you can mail them to us. I think the email is shown on the slide that's been projected there. We're also entering your names in our listserv, and we'll be sending you updates on future events. I'd also like to add that on the NSABB website is a video that's intended for broad usage in terms of raising awareness and educating people about the dual-use issue. It was done here in the U.S. We hope to do ones in partnership with countries around the world, but if it would turn out to be a useful resource for you in your laboratories or working with others, please feel free to use it. Finally, there's an evaluation sheet, hopefully on each of your chairs or at your desk, so we would like feedback on today's event and how to plan future events. So please complete that form and leave it with Dave or others there at the meeting place in Beijing. And just finally, thank you and have a wonderful evening.